My husband wasn't a business consultant. He was a silent partner in an organized scheme that was about to burn our entire world to the ground. I realized too late that I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was a liability, and he had been given the order to erase me. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a finality that rattled the frames of the family photos lining the hallway. I didn't even look up. I knew the rhythm of his anger by heart, the aggressive toss of his coat onto the mahogany coat rack, the metallic jingle of keys hitting the console table with a sharp, piercing sound, and then that cold, suffocating silence. He walked right past me in the living room, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere behind my left shoulder, as if I were a ghost haunting a house that no longer belonged to me. I sat on the velvet sofa, my hands trembling as I clutched a glass of lukewarm tea. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask how my day was, he didn't offer a grunt of acknowledgement, and he certainly didn't look at my face, the face that had been swollen from crying since he left that morning. I was invisible to him, a piece of furniture he had grown tired of dusting. The tension in the air was so thick I could almost taste the ozone of an approaching storm. For months, our marriage had been a slow-motion car crash. We were two strangers bound by legal documents and a mortgage, living in a house built on secrets. He was a man who lived his life in shadows, coming home at odd hours with his shirt smelling of industrial chemicals and stale cigarettes. I had spent years ignoring the red flags, telling myself he was just stressed with his consulting business, that the late-night calls were just international clients. But tonight, the air felt different. It felt dangerous. I watched him disappear into his study, the room I was strictly forbidden to enter. The door clicked shut, but not before I saw him slide a heavy deadbolt into place. A moment later, I heard the muffled sound of a burner phone hitting the desk, followed by the frantic tapping of someone typing a message that needed to be sent now. My heart hammered against my ribs. Something was breaking inside our home, and for the first time, I realized that the danger wasn't just in the room he just exited. It was lurking in the very walls of our house. I waited. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked away the seconds like a countdown to an explosion. My mind raced through the strange occurrences of the last few weeks, the unmarked envelopes, the sudden disappearance of our savings, the way he would twitch whenever a siren wailed in the distance. I had found a ledger in his coat pocket once, years ago, that contained names and strings of numbers that didn't look like any business transaction I had ever seen. I had pushed it to the back of my mind, buried it under layers of denial, but now it clawed its way to the surface. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I knew I should stay in the living room, keep the status quo, and pray that he would eventually calm down. But the silence from the study was too heavy, too deliberate. I crept toward the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My breath hitched in my throat as I reached the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath until my lungs burned. At first, there was only the hum of his laptop. Then I heard a voice, a low, gravelly whisper that I didn't recognize. He was arguing with someone. "I told you, I'm out," he hissed, his voice trembling with a rare, raw fear. "I can't keep moving these packages. They're watching everything. If the service finds out about the organized scheme we've been running, we're all going down for an enormous sentence. I'm not going to spend my life in a cell because you got greedy." My blood turned to ice. Organized scheme? Packages? The world tilted on its axis. My husband wasn't a consultant. He was a link in a chain that led to something much darker. I felt the floor drop out from under me. All the lavish dinners, the expensive vacations, the luxury car in the driveway. It was all bought with blood money, paid for by the distribution of those forbidden substances I had seen mentioned in the news. He was neck deep in something that would make him the target of a major internal security investigation. He slammed his hand against the desk, and I jumped, pulling away from the door. He was pacing now. I could hear his heavy boots hitting the hardwood. "I don't care about the consequences for you," he growled. "I'm cutting the line. If I go down, I'm taking the whole network with me. I have the files, I have the names, and I have the evidence of the illegal weapons shipments. I'm done playing by your rules." The gravity of his words hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was the one who could dismantle it, and that made him the most hunted man in the city. I stumbled backward, my heart racing so fast I thought I might faint. I had to get out. I had to call for help, even if that help was the very organization he was terrified of. But as I turned to run back toward the living room, a floorboard shrieked beneath my heel. The pacing in the study stopped instantly. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying, and heavy. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, praying he wouldn't check the door. Then I heard it. The slow, deliberate sound of the deadbolt sliding back and the creak of the door swinging wide open behind me. He wasn't just coming out. He was standing right there, and I knew with a sickening certainty that he had heard every single word. The air in the hallway turned arctic, a sudden drop in temperature that mirrored the freezing dread flooding my veins. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My muscles were locked, paralyzed by the realization that I was no longer a wife in her own home. I was a liability that needed to be erased. He stood at the threshold of the study, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the hardwood floor, reaching toward me like a grasping hand. "How long have you been standing there, Elena?" His voice wasn't the roaring anger I had braced for. It was calm, clinical, and infinitely more terrifying. It was the voice of a man who had already calculated the risk and decided on the solution. I finally mustered the courage to turn, my knees wobbling as I faced him. He looked disheveled, his tie undone, his eyes wide and bloodshot, fixed on me with a predatory focus. He held a small black notebook in one hand, and the other was shoved deep into his pocket. A pocket I now suspected held more than just a burner phone. I came to bring you tea," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The lie tasted like ash. I knew he saw through it instantly. I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten as he slowly pulled his hand from his pocket. He wasn't holding a weapon, not yet, but he was holding something far worse, a series of photographs. He tossed them onto the console table between us. They fanned out like a gruesome deck of cards. They were photos of me, not just recent ones, but shots from weeks ago. Leaving the grocery store, meeting my sister for coffee, even sitting in my car at the park. Someone had been following me. Or perhaps he had been keeping tabs on me all along, ensuring his assets were accounted for. "You've been a very curious wife, Elena," he said, stepping closer. Every step he took felt like a hammer blow against my heart. "You see, this organized scheme I'm involved in, it doesn't tolerate leaks. It doesn't tolerate loose ends. And my partners, they aren't as forgiving as I am." "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied again, trying to sound hollow and unintelligent, hoping he would underestimate me. "I don't care about your work. I want things to be normal." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that lacked any warmth. "Normal? You think you can go back to normal after what you heard? You heard about the shipments, the forbidden substances, the weight of the enormous sentences hanging over our heads. You're not a bystander anymore, Elena. You're a witness." He reached out and grabbed my arm, his grip bruisingly tight. He pulled me toward the study, and for a split second I contemplated screaming, but I knew the neighbors were too far away, and the security system he had installed was designed to keep people out, not let me run. He shoved me into the center of the study and closed the door, locking it again. This time, the click sounded like the locking of a vault. "I need to know exactly how much you heard," he demanded, leaning over the desk. He pulled a laptop toward him, the glow of the screen illuminating the sweat on his forehead. "If you heard enough to identify the people I'm working with, I have to make a choice. And believe me, I don't want to make that choice." My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. The window was locked, and the glass was reinforced. The heavy mahogany desk was a barricade between me and the door. But then my eyes landed on the floor near the wastebasket. There, sticking out from under a pile of shredded documents, was a small silver flash drive. It was clearly marked with a red tag, the same tag I had seen on the ledger years ago. "I didn't hear anything," I said, trying to steady my shaking hands. "I just heard you shouting about being out. I thought you were talking to your business partner about the firm. I don't know anything about substances or weapons." He looked at me, searching my eyes for the slightest flicker of dishonesty. He stepped forward, invading my personal space until I could smell the metallic tang of his cologne, mixed with something earthy and bitter. He leaned in close, his breath ghosting over my ear. "You're a terrible liar, Elena. I can hear your heart racing from here." He pulled away, his face hardening into a mask of cold resolve. "Fine. If you're truly innocent, then you won't mind helping me finish this. We have to clear the logs. We have to wipe the digital footprint clean before the internal security teams reach our server. If you help me, maybe we can get out of this." He turned back to the computer, his focus shifting for a heartbeat. In that split second, I lunged for the floor. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the flash drive. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it and shoved it into the waistband of my skirt just as he spun around. "What was that?" he barked, his eyes narrowing. "I tripped," I said, clutching my ankle, praying he bought it. "I tripped on the rug." He stared at me, his gaze dropping to the floor, then back to my face. He didn't look convinced. He reached for his phone and his thumb hovered over the screen. "I have a call to make. If they tell me you're a liability, then there's nothing I can do to save you." I felt the flash drive pressing against my skin like a hot coal. I knew it contained the names of everyone involved, the key to bringing this whole house of cards down. If he made that call, if he realized what I had taken, I wouldn't leave this room alive. He tapped the screen and held the phone to his ear, his eyes never leaving mine as he spoke to the person on the other end. "Yeah, it's me," he said into the phone, his voice steady. "I have a problem. The wife, she knows too much. What should I do?" He waited, listening to the response. His expression didn't change, but his eyes grew dark, devoid of any shred of the man I had married. He hung up the phone and looked at me with a terrifyingly blank expression. They're on their way to resolve the situation. And since I'm the one who failed to keep you quiet, they've told me I have to be the one to finish it. He reached into his jacket, and this time, he pulled out a heavy, dark object that made the blood in my veins stop flowing entirely. It was a piece of illegal hardware, cold and lethal in the dim light of the study. He leveled it at me, his finger hovering over the trigger, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Elena, but this organized scheme is worth more than us." The silence that followed the click of the safety being disengaged was absolute. The room felt as though the oxygen had been vacuumed out, leaving me gasping in the suffocating stillness. He stood there, his hand rock steady, the weapon an extension of his own cold, detached ambition. I watched his index finger tighten, just a fraction, and the terror that had been a dull roar in my head suddenly sharpened into a crystal-clear survival instinct. "You really think killing me will solve this?" I managed to keep my voice from cracking, though my legs were screaming for me to bolt. "If you pull that trigger, you're not just a criminal, you're a murderer. Do you think your partners will protect you then? They'll use it to leverage you. You'll be the one they throw to the lions when the internal security teams finally knock on the door." He paused, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. It was minuscule, a shadow passing over a frozen lake, but it was there. He knew I was right. In their world, loyalty was a currency that devalued the moment you became a liability. By killing me, he would be painting a permanent target on his own back, becoming a loose end that the network would eventually need to prune. "I don't have a choice," he muttered, though the conviction in his voice was wavering. "They're watching. They're probably listening right now." He gestured vaguely toward the ceiling, suggesting there were hidden microphones, or perhaps he was just spiraling into the paranoia that came with being a traitor to his own gang. I took a slow, calculated step backward, my heart thundering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could feel the sharp edge of the flash drive digging into my skin, a secret anchor keeping me grounded in the horror of the moment. "Then let's go," I whispered, my voice trembling with a forced, fragile bravado. "If they're watching, give them a show. But if you walk out that door with me, we could disappear. I have money in a secondary account, money they don't know about. We could get to the border before they even realize you've defected. But you have to put that thing away." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for a lie, for a trap. He was a man who lived by manipulation, so he assumed everyone else was doing the same. "You're lying," he spat. "You'd call the authorities the moment we reached the highway." "I'm a survivor," I replied, holding his gaze. "And right now, the only way to survive is to be in the same car. You need someone to watch your back while you navigate the fallout. If you do this alone, you're dead within the hour." He stared at me for an eternity. The weapon remained leveled at my chest, but his breathing had become ragged, his chest heaving with the weight of his own desperate realization. He was caught between his terror of the organized scheme and his sudden, blinding fear of the future he had created. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered the weapon. He didn't holster it, but he stepped back, giving me a few inches of breathing room. "Get your things," he hissed, his eyes darting to the door. "We have 20 minutes before the recovery team arrives. If you try to run, if you try to pull out a phone, I won't hesitate again." I nodded, moving toward the door, my movements precise and adrenaline-fueled. As I reached the handle, I paused, glancing back at him. He was frantically wiping the laptop hard drive, his movements jerky and desperate. He had no idea I had the flash drive. He thought he was clearing the tracks, but he was just digging his own grave. I stepped into the hallway and sprinted toward the bedroom. My mind was a whirlwind of calculations. I didn't need to pack. I needed to get to the safe. But the safe was in the master closet, which meant passing the bedroom windows that were surely being watched by someone outside. I slid along the wall, staying in the shadows, my heart hammering so hard I feared it would be audible to anyone waiting in the darkness of our yard. I reached the closet and punched in the code. The door swung open and I grabbed the emergency bag I had prepared months ago. The just-in-case bag, though I never truly believed I'd need it. Passport, cash, and a burner phone of my own. I threw it over my shoulder and turned to leave, but a sudden flash of light cut through the bedroom window, illuminating the entire room like a flare. A car had pulled into the driveway, its high beams cutting through the gloom. I dived to the floor just as the engine cut out. Through the blinds, I saw two figures emerge from the vehicle, men in long, heavy coats, their silhouettes menacing and familiar. These were not police. They were the cleanup crew. My husband's partners had arrived ahead of schedule. I scrambled to the bedroom door and peeked out. My husband was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down into the foyer with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He hadn't expected them this fast. He gripped the weapon in his hand, his knuckles white. "Elena!" he hissed, his voice frantic, echoing through the upstairs landing. "They're here. There's no more time." Suddenly, the front door, the heavy oak door that had been locked just minutes ago, groaned under the impact of a massive, coordinated strike. It didn't splinter. It burst inward as if hit by a battering ram. The muffled sound of footsteps echoed through the house, deliberate and rhythmic. They were coming up the stairs. My husband turned toward the hallway, his face a mask of primal desperation. He raised the weapon, pointing it toward the top of the staircase, just as a silencer-equipped shot shattered the silence of the night, followed immediately by the shattering of the bedroom mirror behind me. The house was no longer a home. It was a hunting ground, and I was trapped between a man who wanted me dead and the monsters coming to collect the debt. I lunged for the attic crawlspace door, pulling it open just as a figure in a black mask rounded the corner, their eyes locking onto mine with the cold, dead focus of a predator, sensing movement in the dark. I scrambled into the dark, cramped attic, the wood splintering behind me as a second shot whistled through the air, embedding itself into the drywall where my head had been a heartbeat before. I didn't look back. I pulled the heavy insulated trapdoor shut with a violent tug, the latch clicking into place just as the floorboards above me thundered under the weight of heavy, tactical boots. My heart was a frantic drum, drowning out the ambient sounds of the house being torn apart. Below, I heard my husband's voice. Not the confident, cold tone of a mastermind, but the ragged, high-pitched plea of a man facing the Reaper. "I have the data. I've wiped the servers. Don't do this. We can negotiate." There was no negotiation. There was only the sound of a struggle, the crashing of furniture, and a muffled, wet thud that made my blood run cold. Then the silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. They weren't looking for him anymore. They were looking for the asset he claimed to have hidden. They were looking for the flash drive. I lay belly down in the dust and insulation, my fingers white-knuckled around the small silver stick in my pocket. Every breath was a risk, every exhale a gamble. I could hear their voices now, low and distorted through the ceiling. They were moving from room to room, opening drawers, turning over heavy oak dressers, their movements precise and ruthless. They weren't just searching for the drive, they were sanitizing the scene. "Check the master suite," one of them rasped, his voice devoid of emotion. "The wife couldn't have gone far. If she has it, the entire network is compromised. Bring her in alive, if possible. But the drive is the priority. If she resists, dispose of the evidence." The floorboards in the bedroom groaned directly beneath my face. I watched through a tiny, rotted knot in the floorboards as a laser sight flickered across the bed sheets, searching for movement. They knew I was in the house. They probably knew I was hiding in the walls. I began to crawl, my movement snake-like and silent, toward the ventilation shaft that led to the kitchen pantry. It was a tight squeeze, the metal edges of the ducting biting into my skin, but it was the only way out. As I inched forward, I saw a flicker of movement below. One of the men was standing in the center of our bedroom, his gun lowered, talking into a throat mic. "Target is likely in the structure. Sweep the crawl spaces," he commanded. My blood turned to ice. They weren't leaving. They were going to strip this house down to the studs until they found me. I reached the kitchen duct, and as I peered down through the slats, I saw the back door being kicked open. 2 more figures entered, their coats dusted with the wet leaves of the garden. They were checking the perimeter, ensuring there was no escape route. I looked at the flash drive in my hand. It was so small, so unassuming, yet it held the power to bring down the most dangerous organized scheme in the region. If I turned myself in, they would kill me before I ever saw a courtroom. If I stayed here, I was a trapped animal waiting to be slaughtered. But there was a third option, a desperate, suicidal one. I pulled out my burner phone. It was set to a silent, encrypted frequency. I hadn't dared to use it before, fearing the signal could be traced, but now it was my only hope. I pulled up the contact labeled internal and hit send. A single pre-programmed message. "I have the assets. 342 Oakwood. Send the team." The screen flickered. "Message sending." A heavy thud sounded directly above me, followed by the sound of a crowbar prying at the attic access door. The ceiling was beginning to buckle. They were coming up. I pressed the phone against my chest, waiting for the confirmation, but the screen went black. No service. I cursed under my breath, my fingers frantically trying to reboot the device. The ceiling above the hallway gave way with a deafening crash, showering the floor with insulation and plaster. A heavy boot stepped into the attic, and the beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating the dust motes and my own trembling hands. The light swung toward me, catching my face. I squinted, blinded by the harsh, white glare, and heard the distinct metallic click of a weapon being readied. "Found her!" the man hissed, his voice echoing in the narrow space. He lunged forward, his hand reaching out to grab my hair. I didn't scream. I swung my heavy, metal-cased burner phone with every ounce of strength I had, connecting with his temple. He stumbled back, his flashlight dropping to the floor, sending chaotic shadows dancing across the rafters. I didn't wait to see if he was down. I kicked out the side panel of the vent and dropped, landing hard on the kitchen counter, sliding off and crashing onto the tile floor. I scrambled toward the back door, my lungs burning. The kitchen lights suddenly blindingly bright as one of the men in the hallway entered, his silhouette filling the doorway. He didn't fire. He looked at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, and he slowly reached for his holster. "Nowhere to go, sweetheart," he drawled, stepping over the threshold. "Give us the drive and maybe we'll make it quick." I backed into the corner of the pantry, my hand gripping the edge of the granite countertop, searching for anything to throw. My fingers closed around a heavy, industrial-sized butcher's knife, a remnant of a life that felt like 1,000,000 years ago. I raised it, my hand shaking uncontrollably, realizing that my only chance of survival was to force them into a confrontation they didn't want in the middle of a residential neighborhood. But just as he stepped forward to grab me, the front window shattered inward. A flashbang grenade rolled across the hardwood floor, filling the room with a blinding, deafening white light. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, as a team in tactical black gear breached every entrance simultaneously. The chaos was absolute. The sound of shouting, the bark of orders, and the sharp reports of weapons firing filled the house. I curled into a ball, the flash drive clutched against my heart. Through the haze of smoke and the flashes of light, I saw a man in a clean black tactical suit move toward me. He wasn't one of the cleaners. He looked at me, his eyes cold and clinical, and he held out his hand. "Elena?" he asked, his voice calm amidst the carnage. "We're the internal security response team. Give me the drive and we'll take you to a secure location." I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the badge clipped to his vest, a badge that looked, to my terrified eyes, identical to the ones worn by the men who had just tried to kill me. I took a step back, the flash drive burning in my hand. How did I know who was who? How did I know if I was being rescued, or if I had just traded one set of monsters for another? The man stepped closer, his expression softening into something meant to be comforting, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Trust us," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We're the only ones who can keep you alive." I looked at the window, then back at the man. I had the keys to the kingdom, and the people coming to collect them were all wearing the same mask. I had to make a choice, and the floorboards beneath us were already starting to catch fire from the flashbangs. I took the flash drive, held it over the open, flaming floor, and looked the officer in the eye. "If you take a single step closer," I shouted over the roar of the fire, "I'll drop it into the furnace and we all go down together." The man froze, his boot inches from the edge of the jagged, burning hole in the kitchen floor. The roar of the fire intensified, hungry for the old wood and the secrets buried within it. But for a second, time seemed to suspend itself. The officer's face, which had been a mask of calculated authority, flickered with genuine, raw panic. He knew, just as I did, that the data on this drive was the only currency that mattered in the high-stakes game of shadows they were playing. "Don't do it, Elena," he said, his voice straining to remain steady. "You don't understand the scale of what you're holding. That drive doesn't just destroy a cell, it dismantles entire systems of influence. If you drop it into that furnace, you're not just burning evidence. You're burning your only ticket out of this nightmare. We are the only ones capable of putting you into protective custody." I felt the heat searing my skin, a physical reminder of how close the end really was. "I've heard that line before," I spat back, my grip tightening on the cool metal of the flash drive. "My husband told me he was out. He told me he was protected, and he told me we were a team. Look where that got him." I glanced at the hallway where his body lay behind a veil of gray smoke, a casualty of the very machine he had tried to weaponize. The realization hit me then. There were no good guys in this war. There were only those who wanted the power for themselves and those who were collateral damage. I was the collateral, and I was done being a pawn. "You want the drive?" I asked, my voice echoing through the smoke-filled kitchen. "Then tell me right now who ordered the cleanup. Who decided that a witness was worth less than a line of code?" The officer hesitated. He glanced at his men. 3 other operatives standing in the living room, their weapons trained on the corners of the ceiling, completely ignoring the fire. He was looking for an out, a lie that would sound convincing enough to make me lower my arm. But before he could speak, a crackling sound erupted from the radio on his shoulder. "Abandon the site. Primary objective is lost. The asset is too volatile." The officer's eyes widened. He looked at me, then at the fire, and finally at the flash drive. He knew the order was a death sentence for me. If they couldn't control me, they would ensure I never left the house alive. He shifted his stance, his finger twitching toward his holster. I didn't wait for his next move. I swung my arm, not toward the fire, but toward the open window behind me. I hurled the flash drive with everything I had. It arced through the smoke, a tiny silver projectile, and vanished into the darkness of the garden just as a heavy thud signaled a new arrival at the back door. The officer lunged, but he wasn't going for me. He was sprinting for the window. The room erupted in chaos. He collided with one of his own men as they scrambled to intercept the drive. I didn't care about the device anymore. The moment it left my hand, the target was off my back. I grabbed a kitchen towel, pressed it to my face to shield myself from the thick black smoke, and bolted for the utility closet. I knew the layout of this house better than anyone. I pulled the hidden lever behind the pantry shelving, revealing the narrow emergency chute we had installed for safety years ago, a feature my husband had insisted on, never knowing I would eventually use it to escape his own shadow. I slid into the darkness, gravity pulling me down into the crawl space beneath the foundation. I crawled through the cold, damp earth, the sounds of the fire and the shouting fading into a dull roar above me. I emerged in the overgrown brush at the edge of our property, emerging into the biting cold of the night air. I didn't look back at the inferno that used to be my life. I ran until the sirens began to wail in the distance. Real police, real sirens, the kind that weren't part of a private security firm's cleanup crew. I reached the main road just as the first fire trucks crested the hill. I kept walking, blending into the shadows, a woman in a ruined dress, clutching nothing but the knowledge of what lay in the dirt of my backyard. 3 days later, I sat in a small, nondescript diner in a town 4 states away. I watched the news on a muted television in the corner. The headlines were all about an industrial accident at an elite suburban residence, a massive fire that had leveled a property linked to high-profile finance and internal corporate scandals. They spoke of missing files, of corruption, of arrests that were already rocking the city. The drive had been found. By whom, I didn't know, and I didn't care. It had leaked, and the firestorm it ignited was doing exactly what I had hoped. It was burning the whole structure to the ground. I set my coffee cup down and picked up my bag. I had a new name, a new city, and for the first time in years, a life that belonged only to me. I looked at my reflection in the diner window. The woman looking back was tired, her eyes haunted by the ghosts of the life she had left behind, but she was free. The danger hadn't followed me. It had been too busy consuming itself in the wreckage of the house on Oakwood. I stood up, walked out into the bright morning sunlight, and didn't look back until the silhouette of the town was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. The silence of my new life was beautiful, and for the first time, I finally felt the weight lift from my chest. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And the best part was, they would never, ever find me.